Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler. I'm grabbing my trench coat and working on my kickboxing skills to prep for today's discussion about Say Anything, which is number 25 on the 50 best rom-coms list. I want to welcome in returning guest, Beau Gatlin. So, Beau, is your boombox still in working order?
My original boombox from the 7th grade lasted quite a long time. I'm 41 now. I got that when I was 13 from working at a feedlot. It was a bribe for my mom to get me to do it, and it lasted until about 8 years ago, I'm happy to say. So no longer, but it still looms large in my memory.
Yeah, very nice. Last time you were on the show, we discussed the Predator prequel, Prey, which we both said at the time is really not a movie we both would normally watch or discuss. So I think it's fair to say Anything is probably more in the mold of our type of movie. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm so glad we're talking about Say Anything today. Yeah, it's very fair to say.
That's good. Well, let's grab our graduation caps and head to Seattle to discuss Cameron Crowe's Say Anything.
I'm gonna take out Diane Court.
Diane Court doesn't go out. She's a brain.
Trapped in the body of a game show hostess.
We don't want to see you get hurt.
I want to get hurt.
Diane Court.
Hi, Lloyd, sir. I'm an athlete, so I rarely drink. Kickboxing. I heard of kickboxing, sport of the future. I can see by your face, no. My point is you can relax because your daughter will be safe with me for the next 7 to 8 hours, sir.
Say Anything is a 1989 American teen romantic comedy drama film written and directed by Cameron Crowe in his feature directorial debut. The film follows the romance between Lloyd Dobler, John Cusack, an average student, and Diane Court, Iona Skye, the class valedictorian, immediately after their graduation from high school. This budding romance is threatened when Diane's overly possessive, disapproving father, played by John Mahoney, interferes with their relationship. With a prize scholarship to study abroad hanging in the balance, Diane must find a way to make both men happy. In 2002, Entertainment Weekly ranked Say Anything as the greatest modern movie romance, and it was ranked number 11 on Entertainment Weekly's list of the 50 best high school movies. So, Beau, do you agree with those rankings?
I think, and I love this movie, that those are quite generous. You said one of these ranked it as number 1?
Greatest modern movie romance.
Wow. I mean, interesting, to say the least. So many things about this movie hold up, I think. So many things don't. But yeah, I think those are somewhat generous, and I love this movie. So that's interesting.
Is it a movie you've seen a lot?
I've probably seen this less than a dozen times, but maybe more than 5.
Okay, yeah. No, honestly, I know I had seen this before. I can't even tell you when I saw it. I mean, it's probably one of those, there's the iconic scene of John Cusack hanging, holding the boombox above his head.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I saw it. I'm a big Cameron Crowe fan. Some of his movies are my favorite personal movies. And so I know I probably almost saw that and probably saw Singles, one of his other movies, probably around the same time, just kind of went on a little Cameron Crowe kick. But it had been a while since I'd seen this. So it is one of those, and I mean this in a good way, it makes sense that this was a directorial debut. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Well, I didn't realize this was his debut. And I have to say, for as generous as I think those ratings are, he kind of knocked it out of the park for a debut, I think. I mean, so many things really, really are outstanding about this movie. So, I mean, kudos to you, Cameron Crowe.
He's been waiting for Beau and Nathan to.
I'm sure, yeah. It's a validation.
Yeah, and I don't mean that as a knock, but I do think this movie is probably, especially preparing for this podcast after I watched it, the second time rewatching this, I really enjoyed the movie, just enjoyed my time with it. And honestly, prepping for this podcast and discussing about it, and when I started writing the review and putting to words about this movie, I kind of realized it was a lot deeper movie than in the moment. Like, there's a lot of things I think that are going on. I think where it might kind of show that it's a directorial debut is there's some things that aren't quite as tight as like probably you would see in later, like in Jerry Maguire or Almost Famous. But man, I do think just the brilliance and how he uses a lot of things, anything from the pen to there's a little tidbit about that story where she's talking about being scared on the airplane and how that plays out in the final scene. There's just a lot of things like that working where you're like, oh yeah, this guy knows how to construct a movie.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Related to the tightness, maybe we'll talk about that some later, but a lot of memorable moments and scenes and quotes in this one for sure. And I'll tell you up front that probably 80s movies like this are just my absolute favorite um, type of movie. I mean, I was born in 81, so I'm certain I would not have seen this when I was, when it was still the 80s, but I would have watched it probably on cable television or something like that. And probably if I had anyone I felt like I could relate to, and I don't know if it was the quirkiness or the is John Cusack is what I'm getting at. I mean, Better Off Dead was a totally strange, movie with Steve Savage movie and so many Cusack movies though. I mean, he was definitely a man of the 80s, right? And beyond,
Right.
but probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite actor in 80s movies like this. He's just the best.
Yeah, and there's something he has this everyman quality to him, especially around this time in the 80s and everything. But also there's a charisma there that kind of transcends the screen a little bit. I mean, he even plays a little. I think he's in Stand By Me as the older brother who's died, and I think there's just like a flashback scene of him in it, and there is something like. He looks normal, but he's also handsome, but he's also real kind of quirky, and I think people can really relate to him.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's ever experienced self-doubt or been less than completely confident could love a character like Lloyd Dobler in this movie, or most of the characters that John Cusack plays. I love that his sister is in this movie as well. I mean, there's some, if you watch this now, I guess you might not recognize Jeremy Piven, but gosh, there's so many great actors in this movie. The guy, her father is played by, I don't know his name, but I just call him the dad from Frasier, having watched that show for many years.
Right.
John Mahoney, is that his name?
Yeah, that's his name.
Yeah, great cast.
Yeah, I think the first time I watched this, for some reason, Frasier was actually a show I watched a lot. Actually, probably not when in the moment when it was on, but in East Texas, for whatever reason, I think Frasier came on after the 10 o'clock news. And so I like reruns and I would watch it then or whatever. But yeah, when I saw this movie at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, I just had never even thought about him doing things outside of Frasier for whatever reason. But yeah, he's really good at as the dad here. And I think what I really liked about this movie was that it's clearly a teenage romance that's happening. And Cameron Crowe leans into these things that are very funny and almost nostalgic of like, I mean, I was guilty of like when I liked someone, like I liked them, really hard, like big, it wasn't quite like end of the world type of stuff, but that's how teenage love kind of frames a lot of things. Like if I don't get this person, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I like how he doesn't really poke fun of that, but he makes like he makes funny moments of it, but it's also a very serious thing. This is a time in their lives where they're having to make big decisions about, after graduation, what am I going to do? And honestly, playing into the John Mahoney, Diane's dad, like, and the the tax problems that he have, I like how he frames this teen romance into real life conflicts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's I think the first time I rewatched this where it would have had any real maybe meaning to it was when I was a junior in college, and I had just started talking with Stacy, who is now my wife, and we were visiting over the phone that summer. She had gone away to work in a different state, and so I was spending the summer attending OU, doing some summer school, and living with my cousin and his wife, who were gracious enough to let me have a room in their house. And they had a newborn, so I didn't really want to bother them. So I've spent most of my time in this room, and they must have had Say Anything on VHS. And there was a VCR in the room. So this might have been like, let's say 2003. And so I probably actually watched it more than I mentioned up front, because I watched it lots that summer. And obviously with watching it now, 18 years later, or maybe 20 years later, I guess, it hits very different, because I was very much, I suppose, like you, in that if I was going to fall for somebody, it was all in, it was all or nothing. And I could totally have related to Lloyd in this movie then. It honestly now just makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As a father of 3 daughters who I hope, someday go on to to find significant relationships, that this guy has no plans, honestly, outside of one, being a great guy, and that's commendable, and it's all you would hope for I suppose your daughters, to find someone that's a great person. But also, what happens when this doesn't work out? I mean, he's just off the deep end, as he did. And what a great, like, dark moment in this movie. I mean, the standing in a phone booth, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but standing in a phone booth in the rain, talking to his sister, and just driving it around with a personal narrative, hitting up some guy. I mean, it's so dramatic, but it's probably also, because of that, just so relatable as well.
Completely. But it's hard because, like you said, having the perspective now from a dad standpoint. And I just want to know one thing, a common thing I've been finding in a lot of these rom-coms are single dads, for whatever reason. Like in there, so there's this movie, 10 Things I Hate About You. I don't know why this has become a motif in rom-coms, but I guess maybe it allows the girl to, want to get away from the dad. I don't know, for whatever reason. But yeah, like you said, as a dad now, it's one of those, he has no thought about the future of what he's going to do, but it's hard because he obviously is committed to her. So like, it's like, it's like, well, he doesn't have any of these plans, but you at least know he's going to, he's a nice guy, like you said, and he's going to care for her and watch out for her. They allude to that at the party scene, where he's always kind of checking on her, but really, honestly, not in like a creepy way, which it could be, because I kind of like that, because they go to the party together, and he, even though he likes her, he's comfortable with like letting her do her own thing. He gives enough distance, I guess, where she doesn't get too creeped out.
Can we talk just a little bit about how great, at least to me, the little side conversations he has with his 2 friends, that he's bouncing ideas off of? Who is it? CC and DC. I might have those names wrong, but I mean, those are some great moments. It seems that he's kind of absent of male friends really that are close. Although Lloyd is an everyman. I mean, this party, everyone loves him. He's the key master. He doesn't seem to have an enemy in the world, though maybe any real direction or ambition. He knows what he doesn't want. But I think the moments with his friends and their little quick conversations were some of my favorites in the entire movie.
It does a good job of saying that he came in late into this process of high school, because I remember a guy who started our senior year, and everybody just kind of generally loved him just because he was new and he was nice. Yeah. And he got really popular, but like, I don't think anybody ever truly got to know him. And I think that actually fits this narrative really, really well. I think that would happen in a high school at that point, but they would quickly become the key master.
You know what's funny too? I haven't thought about this until now, but for this to be a high school movie, and I suppose it is, but like, it starts at the end, literally, of high school. I mean, it's graduation day, and for me, that period of time from when high school had actually ended until college was just kind of strange to me. I mean, you're leaving something you're very familiar with, entering something not at all. I was planning to go to college and knew where I was headed. So for this to even be considered a high school movie is kind of funny, just from the sense that they were in high school for, leaving it. But Um, another kind of just maybe cringe thing is the fact that this party that they go to. I mean, he's 22. He's a hanger on. But I suppose maybe that's realistic as well.
Yeah. And I also have to say, and this is probably one of those like what I was talking about, these little moments that are kind of felt like, okay, this is like a newer director that's on the scene. But when his guidance counselor who shows up at the party, I don't really know, and famously played by BB Newirth, who was also in the Cheers Frasier universe, and this was her first movie actually. She just shows up to the party to basically chide Lloyd about what decisions he was making, and that he was the only one who did declare something. And then she just kind of leaves, and I was just like, why is she there at this party? So there's kind of a few moments like that where, like, kind of nitpicky. You're like, that was very much a like, okay, audience, we're gonna set this up for you. So yeah.
1000% struck me that way. And not only did she show up, she almost was like catching him on her way inside. Like what? Like she pulled up with a purpose. She parked in the driveway and she's gonna roll in there. I was so confused by that as well. I don't know if that's a hallmark of an 80s movie, or maybe it is just a directorial debut type of thing. But yeah, of course, wouldn't have thought a second about that being that age, having not been in, or being younger and having never been in high school. Maybe it would have seemed odd to me if, I were at a party and my guidance counselor didn't show up.
Yeah. I think another thing that hits, I think certain people may have struggled with this more than other people, but just that general pressure as you're leaving high school, going out into the quote unquote real world. I really like that portrayal here. Very similar to like the themes they're kind of playing with in The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman's film.
Mhm.
But no matter, like you, like I knew where I wanted to go. I knew what my major was going to be. I mean, there were those things, but I think anybody can relate to that pivotal moment, no matter if you have things figured out or if you don't at all. Or also if you're like someone who's had their future planned out, like Diane's in this movie. I'm sure a lot of people could relate to that, of that constant parental pressure of being perfect. And so I think Crow does a good job of kind of, I think no matter where you're on the spectrum, you probably connect to somebody in this movie.
Yeah, there's a real sweetness to both characters. Watching it this most recent time, I had never really kind of viewed the whole thing through the lens of Diane. And that was kind of interesting to do because she did kind of come across, I know she was worried of being like a priss. She was obviously valedictorian, so she probably sacrificed a lot of social things, but people were honestly happy to have her around.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes across to me as somewhat naive when it comes to like dating, but from the movie, she had gone out with some, frat type guys. She had dated some, and it really kind of lended to just falling in love with her even more, in the sense that she just wasn't about that. She was maybe the best type of person to appreciate a character like Lloyd. And just seeing that genuineness, especially, I mean, for all of his faults, her father in this movie, the relationship that they had and the openness that they had was really kind of admirable. And he certainly wanted to do the right things by her. I mean, the movie Say Anything is really, well, I suppose it feeds into lots of relationships in the movie. I mean, it's all about openness and really saying what's out there. But she certainly had that with her dad. I think it's one of their lines. You can say anything to me, and they could do that. It was nice to see.
Yeah. How did the I even remember watching it the first time and kind of being surprised by this IRS plot line, so to speak, because I think I've been inundated with so many images from this movie, and so I very much kind of went in thinking about what it was going to be, which it is, but then I had no idea about this IRS problems that her dad has in it. And so, do you think that works in this movie?
It's a good question. Again, you put yourself in an 80s movie, you're just along for the ride. So in a sense, I guess so. It is interesting. I don't know if it's just to break this idea that her life was perfect and everything was on track. And clearly from the outset, even though she had done everything she was supposed to do, they had a plan for that. She was very uncertain in her valedictorian speech, right? I mean, she was scared. And so, yeah, it was a little twist, I suppose. Not to mention like the dinner party that they had with, one of Lloyd's probably most memorable quotes about what it is he wants to do with his future. Not buying, selling, or producing anything. I mean, that's so great. But what was kind of fun there was like the guests at that dinner.
Yes.
I was like, where'd these guys come? I mean, who are these people in their universe? It's just her father, so I suppose, and her mother's out of the picture. I suppose he would have had a small, tight group of friends, but he was like the director of an assisted living center.
Right.
What seemed to be a very much like mom and pop type of, this wasn't a corporatized like assisted living center. And his friends kind of came across as like big city art snobs.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that was just there to make Lloyd contrast against them even more. But
yeah,
the IRS thing was unusual for sure. And then it was fun to see, them throwing out some nuggets there, even with, he asked about the jukebox. And he's like, how does one go about getting that, sir? And he's like, oh, you find $9,000. It's, it's later in the movie is the tie into the IRS stuff. But
yeah,
I think earlier on, Diane grew on me more in this version of the movie. I think for Lloyd, his character in the movie, it came across very much as someone who was in love with the idea of love, and he was directing it at her.
Yes.
More so than even she was the object of his love. I mean, he wanted to love somebody. He wanted to, what is it he said at the beginning? Like, I want to get my heart broken.
Mm-hmm.
Or I want to be open. Yeah. And so watching it with that, it was a little bit, it's like, that's what he knew that he wanted. He didn't know what he wanted to do for a career, but he knew that he wanted that. And so he was pursuing that, whether it was Diane or anyone else. I guess lucky for him, it was Diane, but
we've touched on some of the great quotes in this movie. What are some of your favorites?
Okay. I shouldn't lead with my absolute favorite, but I'm going to. And it happens just almost at the very end of the movie. And it's hard to take this movie too seriously, even though it can lend that way. I mean, obviously, Lloyd ends up being really a nice rock and foundation for this relationship. But it's at the very end when they're sitting on the plane, and it's something to the effect of, nobody thinks it will work. We shouldn't be together, should we? And he says, no, you just described every great success story.
Yeah. It's very,
so fantastic. So fantastic.
Yeah.
The one that struck me was, there's a conversation there in a guitar store, and Lloyd is there with his two girlfriends. I think that he's just sent this letter to Diane, and one of the characters, DC, I mean, she has very few lines in the movie, and finally she has something she wants to say, and she speaks up for herself, and she's like, Cece, you never let me talk. Just let me say what I want to say. And then she instantly forgets what it is she was going to say.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. This movie has a lot of like little moments like that, which make it rewatchable. Yeah. What about you?
Oh yeah, for sure. I liked even, and this might have actually been the same scene where they're in the music store, but the world is full of guys. Be a man, don't be a guy. I really like that. I really like that line. You alluded to it also, but when he's in the phone booth in the rain, and my sister said this in the last podcast, so she had clearly seen this movie before, but she gave me a pin. I gave her my heart, and she gave me a pin. And I love how that ties in at the very end, in the jail yard or whatever like that. And of course, you also alluded to the table. Well, first when he meets her dad for the first time, but also the dinner table scene. He just double downs on on kickboxing again.
So my father's in the Army. He wants me to join, but I can't work for that corporation. So what I've been doing lately is kickboxing, which is a new sport, but I think it's got a good future.
Which he wasn't completely off, like UFC, it's jiu-jitsu, not traditional, kickboxing, but, it definitely really took off. So I think you can really credit it back to Lloyd Dobler to the success of martial arts, I think.
Great call, Lloyd. You were totally right about that.
So a lot of these quotes kind of really tie into scenes, but what are some of your favorite scenes?
Okay, so probably the scene toward the end where he's visiting Diane's dad in prison. I mean, okay, let me run this back real quick. So another kind of like the guidance counselor being at a party moment was when it's clear that Diane and Lloyd maybe have something, and she says to him, "I'm only going to be home for 16 weeks." I'm like, wait a second. 16 weeks. Who talks like that? Like that, that's a long time. Like if she had said, "I'm only here for 4 weeks," I'd be like, that's 1 month. That's really short. Like 16 weeks, like plenty of time for lots of things to develop. So anyway, going forward to the point where Lloyd is there. I mean, they're not married. They're not engaged. They've been dating for clearly less than 16 weeks. And he, who is this guy Lloyd that he feels confident to go talk to her dad in prison to really be the intermediary, because he's just such a great guy. I mean, how can you not love Lloyd Dobler for doing this?
Yeah.
I mean, he's, and leading up to the part where he's obviously helped Diane craft this letter that he's given her, but she's crafted different versions. And he knows it so intimately. He's like, is it the version that says this at the end? The dad flips the paper over and it's not that one. Where it says, what is it? I love you, or whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
And he says, like, just knowing that a version like that exists, knowing that for just a minute she felt that and wrote, "I can't help loving you." That has to be a good thing. Such a great moment. And the dad he hates that that's coming from Lloyd.
Yeah.
I mean, he has to hate that, but it was just such a sweet moment of Lloyd just being who he is. And you're like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing in life, but he's got some things figured out. Like he kind of knows what he's about. And that's pretty admirable. That was a favorite scene of mine. How about you? What was one of yours? I'll think of another one.
Oh yeah, well, I had a couple. You alluded to it. We talked about the dinner scene. That was great, but also because I very much related to that scene. I've had not quite that awkward of scene, but I've definitely before been asked a question and I knew I didn't deliver the correct answer to the adult audience. But I like that scene a lot. You've talked just about the love letter itself that he's written to Diane, and I have it here. I just have to read it because they're talking about it, and then when she starts to read it, you as an audience person is ready just to embrace what's said here.
Dear Diane, I'll always be there for you. All the love in my heart, Lloyd.
And that's what I mean by this like teenage romance. Like he did. I mean, it is very sweet. Like, when's the last time I wrote something like that to Whitney? Just because, you know what I mean? Like, it is very sweet, but it is funny as an audience member. You're waiting for this like big like poem or something, and it's just Diane, I'll always be there. I really like that scene and just how his friends play off one another. And speaking of his friends, the party scene where his friend Corey Lilly is, I just wrote it down as the songs about Joe.
That'll never be me. That'll never be me. That'll never be me. No.
You as a musician, like you had to love all the songs she was. How many did they allude to?
65.
Songs?
She wrote 65 songs, and she's gonna sing them all that night. And not only that, she has a rapt audience. Like there is a guy who I don't think left her side all night, and I, I have never in my life been in any scenario that's as exciting as these parties in 80s high school movies look. I mean, there's just so many tremendous things happening everywhere. You can go spend some time over here and listen to that.
Maybe you were going to the wrong parties.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I don't think I went to any parties, so that was probably part of it. But even now, I'm like, I want to find that party now, like where's that kind of action happening. I will say this though. I know Cameron Crowe. I had read that the liner notes to the soundtrack for this had extensive like notes from him on the different songs and stuff. I've never owned the soundtrack to this. I honestly don't even love very many of the songs in this movie at all. But of course, later movies of his, are maybe almost movies to support a soundtrack, right? in a sense. I mean, music is so big to him, and so kudos to Lily and John. I mean, for actually in any scene where they're holding a guitar, they're actually playing it.
Oh yeah.
And so that was kind of fun to see. It was fun to see because I love guitars, and so it was nice to see some old guitar stores in the 80s and just the instruments that were playing. That was cool. But the those two friends of his are just the best. What is it they say after they've read this earth-shattering letter? She says, "Have you ever in your life," or "I've never in my life received a letter like that," or "Have you?" And that friend says, "I've dreamed of it." It's so good. So good.
It's so good. Now we have to talk about, the boombox scene. One of the most, iconic scenes. Even if you haven't seen this movie, you have certainly seen this image, whether it's a poster or T-shirt or wherever. So I even forgot really like, I guess first before I go into it, A, do you love this scene? And B, why do you think it's memorable, if so?
Well, I think that this scene is memorable, one, because it's probably featured on the movie poster, so it's a visual, right?
Yes.
Two, it's been featured in, I think, like lots of things. I know The Simpsons. I think that there's a version of that. I liken this scene to at least watching it in the movie, to like having visited the Alamo. I don't know if you've ever visited the Alamo in San Antonio, but the first time I was in that area, I walked past it 4 times and didn't even notice it until someone pointed it out to me. So I don't know, aside from this being an iconic scene, that it really would have impacted me at all. Other than like, it's just so in line with a grand dramatic gesture, of course. So certainly it can relate to that, and a movie like this would have been terrible for me to have seen, because I would have thought that was just really what's the word, effective.
Yeah. Well, what I was struck by was, one, how fast the actual scene is. It does not take up very much screen time. 2, we get the shot of Diane, who is just laying in her bed, and she never comes out. Like, in theory, it ends up working, I think, in the long run. But like in the moment, like she doesn't run out to him. Like it just happens. It's there and it's gone away, and so the grand gesture of it all, but because it's almost so fleeting, I think, like you said, the poster part of it, and obviously I think the song itself, Peter Gabriel's "In Your Eyes," has a lot to do with that. And I read how I think they kind of tested a lot of different songs, even in the moment that they were filming it, of like what the song would be. But yeah, I thought that was really funny that like it is this grand gesture, but really in the moment it doesn't work. Like she just stays in her room. So
that was totally lost on me until you mentioned it, and now you're so right. You're so right. Yeah, I feel like there are certain things that are just, they loom large in certain periods of time, and being at someone's window, maybe it's just because it was before cell phones. That's probably it. But and not wanting to call someone's house phone. But I can think of like off the top of my head, like I feel like at least 4 movies in the 80s were like throwing rocks at someone's window or being at their window. There's a Steve Martin movie that's called Roxanne.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I won't name them all, but I mean, I guess like if I were from another country and I were watching movies from that period, I'd be like, what, man, like this must be like the thing that you do.
Yeah.
If you really want to get through to somebody, you're at the window, which seems kind of funny to me now. So yeah, and let's talk about that trench coat.
Okay.
All right. I mean, he always has that thing on. Not always, but enough. So I mean, he's wearing it on a flight to England. Lloyd, you don't wear a trench coat on a plane, buddy. You know, I mean, what's he thinking there? It took me out of the moment a little bit. Other than they're really sticking to this being his thing. So that was great.
But he's got to smell a little bit, right?
Hadn't thought of that till now, but you would have to be right.
Always lugging a trench coat around. But hey, to his credit, it is Seattle. Seattle's known for rain, you know, so maybe he's just always prepared.
Yeah. That's a good point. And yeah, he's going to England.
it's-
I mean, you've already got it.
Yeah.
Movie musings.
Usually with movie musings, I go ahead and jump in with a question for you. But just because you mentioned it, I have to tell you a quick story about the Alamo. So
Okay.
we took a family vacation about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was our summer of 35. So we stopped in Waco and Austin, and San Antonio was part of the trip. And we knew this. It was the middle of July. We knew it was going to be hot, but it was the only time we could do this vacation. But we did the river walk, and I said, we have to see the Alamo. I mean, we're here. We have to see it.
Got to do it.
And the look on my wife and girls' faces as we stood outside this building in July, San Antonio heat. And also, granted, I mean, I kind of knew that, but you know, I had Texas. I grew up in Texas. In Texas history, you learned about the Alamo like all the time.
Yeah.
Here in Oklahoma, they don't really teach much about the Alamo. So anyway, I'll never forget the looks on their faces. And we quickly ducked into a what is it? The Hollywood, Planet Hollywood, or Planet Hollywood or Hard Rock Cafe. But anyway, they had a gift shop. Gift shop right off the Riverwalk that was very heavily AC'd, and so that's where we spent most of our time. But I'll never forget their looks at like, why are we looking at this building right now?
Hey, listen, Nathan, don't be so quick to discount, knowledge of the Alamo for a native Oklahoman. I grew up watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I was ready to see the Alamo because you know what? His bicycle was apparently in the basement, or was it the attic of the Alamo? I can't remember.
No, he keeps asking about the basement in the Alamo.
So I was ready to see this Alamo, and it's not as impressive as one might think it would be. Especially in the middle of the summer.
There's no basement in the Alamo. So I was going to ask you, and it's very fitting. I did not plan on this at all. I started this movie and I was like, oh my gosh, we're in May. Like in May is like graduation season. And it was very fitting that we were watching this movie during this time. But I was going to ask you, like, what was graduation like for you? Like in general, like the feelings or the size? I don't know.
So graduation for me was interesting. I went to the same small school from the time I was in kindergarten through graduation. So I basically graduated with 30 people and spent every year of school with those same 30 people. Some people came and went, but so a really, really small school. And my mom was a school teacher there. And so I, though, never felt much of an attachment to that particular place and was ready to move on. And so I was excited to go do new things elsewhere. Now, my senior year, though, I spent I had enough credits that I would go to school for 3 hours a day at my high school, and then I was able to go take like a college class in the afternoon a few days a week. So it was a strange year anyway because I was there like half the time. I really wasn't there. And so I feel like kind of mentally I had already kind of moved on from that. And I had a couple of close friends, and it was not I wouldn't even describe it as bittersweet. However, what I do remember is kind of that. Well, I spent the summer with my high school girlfriend, so and we broke up as soon as college started. So there are certainly moments that I would have been relating to in this movie of seemingly having lost everything that I thought was just so critical and important to me. But I can remember just the anxiousness of not knowing what to expect, because I didn't know what I was going to major in at all. And so I was like, I'm going to college. I always knew I was going to go to college. So I don't know. It was if I could describe, I wouldn't call it awkward, but it was an interesting time. What about you?
Yeah. Oh, I yeah, I went to Baylor, and I don't know if it was unusual, but at not just my school, but a lot of people from my church, there was a big population that came from my hometown to Baylor. And so it was and I grew up going to Waco just because I had family there and stuff also. And so even though it was far away, we had been there so many times just in life, not even just college, that I felt pretty comfortable. And then also the size of the school, I always said it was great because there was always someone new to me, and you could always run into someone you knew.
Mm.
And so there was enough of a Longview population there that it was probably an easier transition than for like a lot of people. But I was definitely ready for the change for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah. So we were talking about the boombox and everything. What was one of your favorite cassette tapes that you owned?
Easy. And I got it through BMG, those music clubs.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it would have been Garth Brooks' "Rope in the Wind."
No, nice. Strangely enough, I was listening to Garth Brooks this weekend. I don't know why, but yeah.
Because it's great music. That's why. What were you listening to?
Oh, we have a Alexa device, and like it's usually I guess my weekend thing after like a long run or whatever. Because in the normal during the weekend I turn on music when I like take a shower and get ready for the day. But I said Alexa, shuffle 90s country hits. Solid. It's solid.
I will tell you, I mean, the story about this boombox is actually bigger than you would probably want it to be, but I'll tell you, when I was 12, I really, really, really wanted a CD player.
Oh yeah.
I didn't own any CDs because I didn't have a CD player. So in my 12-year-old mind, I thought I was going to be really clever and kind of like guilt or pressure my mother into getting me a CD player by going out and buying a CD. And that meant going to Walmart, which was 7 miles away, with my mom, and buying what was the first Garth Brooks compilation CD. I mean, it was only 12 songs. And I owned that CD for a good year and a half, maybe 2 years before I had a CD player. So it didn't work. But by the time I got that CD player, I was real excited to play that Garth Brooks CD. Let me tell you.
I'm sure all the songs were just perfect. Not a bad track on the CD.
Not a bad track. It's hard to go wrong with Garth. Yeah. So
that's funny. I wouldn't have pinned. I mean, I know you're from Oklahoma, so it's easy. Find somebody in this state that doesn't like Garth Brooks. But I wouldn't have pinned you for a country fan.
Everybody's got to start somewhere.
So you alluded to, and we've talked about it before, but you have $3, I have $2. A big component of is the conversation that Diane has with her dad and that open dialogue and everything. And that's a lot to touch on as far as like, how you talk to your daughters. But what is it like to be a girl dad? Do you have like these, obviously they're not to the age that these characters are yet, but do you have those heartfelt type of conversations, openness?
I certainly desire to have that type of relationship. My oldest daughter is almost 13 at this point. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old at this point in time. And I will say this about my mom. She is a great communicator. She's raised me to be very open about talking about things, and I'm so thankful for that. It seems as though right now in my daughter's lives, they do not yet appreciate that quality in me. There's things that they would rather not talk about, maybe with the level of openness that I would. But so I will. That's just something that is very important to me. So I know that someday they'll either appreciate that or they won't. But that's just who I am. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate being married to Whitney, and it probably took a little getting used to, like when we were just that she grew up in a family that talked about everything, like all
Mhm.
the time, and so I try to be better at it. I hold my cards close to my chest sometimes, and so I've really made great strides in that, and so in raising our daughters, we and I appreciate that in her because I see the importance of that, and I try to do that,
Yeah.
with them. But yeah, especially Hallie, who's in the middle school years and stuff. I just one of my favorite podcasters, Bill Simmons, and he mainly does sports, but he has a daughter that just graduated high school, but he's always told stories, and she plays soccer, so they've done all these long road trips and stuff like that. And his best advice, and I think it's great advice, is to just not say anything, like especially in those car trips, because that's our inclination is to always ask questions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he was like, it's just amazing how when I'm just quiet in the car, she'll just start talking to me, So anyway, I really enjoy, we do lots of carpooling with our friends and stuff like that. I'd love to get her friends going and just sitting back and listening. Those are like some of my favorite moments. I learn a lot.
That's great advice. It really is. Yeah, I'm seeing the wisdom in that, especially lately. I've had to adjust my strategy somewhat, and so sometimes saying less is almost more if I'm wanting to get anything from her. Yeah.
Well, you don't mind prodding a little bit. You kind of you like the game,
Oh,
the
sure.
game behind that.
Oh, sure. Sure. What's funny is when we also have friends riding along too, they seem to have no trouble talking with me, and I'm kind of like you. I'm like, "Well, all right, take it away. Like let's get the conversation going and just sit back and kind of listen in. So it's a lot of fun.
Rom-com rankings.
The romantic chemistry between the leads. So, where's your ranking with this? Like, how do you feel the connection is between Lloyd and Diane?
I guess I showed my cards a little too early here, but I think that this is where I just feel like I don't love Diane. I can appreciate her. She's great. She's just a little too. I don't know. I just had a hard time again seeing what was so great to him about her. You know what I mean? And no knock on her, I guess, but I don't know. I wasn't struck by the romantic chemistry in this. It just seemed maybe a little too. I feel like she was kind of awkward at times, honestly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, he was too. It's not like he was Mr. Smooth guy, but yeah. I mean, give me any Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks movie. I mean, I love that type of like chemistry, but I wouldn't rank a whole lot of chemistry in this one. Maybe
Yes.
disagree with me. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, so what's the ranking? What heart ranking would you give this?
I can't give them. I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5.
Oh wow, that's pretty low.
Yeah.
I gave them 3. Like you, it's probably more a relationship of convenience more than anything. They're there for each other at the right time in their lives, and I feel like I'm glad there hasn't been a sequel to this movie, because I feel like whatever happened to them, I just see them it being okay. I feel like it's the departure is probably mutual. I don't know, but he's definitely there to push her to a certain independence, and she's there to maybe kind of showcase what can happen if you have some direction in your life.
Yeah.
But then I feel like when they fully get to those points, it'd be like, okay, it was nice knowing you.
Listen, I mean, no doubt about it. 10 years after this, Diane was married to an investment banker. Lloyd was probably introduced to his wife by Diane because they're still such great friends. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
probably still call each other on the phone. They're that great. She's now in the circle because he's definitely kept up with Corey and DC. There's no doubt about it. They've probably come over to England a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone ended up okay.
Yeah. Do you think he was still friends with her dad?
No.
No, that won't ever change. Well, you touched on it, and we talked a little bit. The second category, the best friends. So, Corey and DC, 1 to 5. What do you give them?
I mean, it's as good as it gets in a movie for me. 5.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're great. And as someone who I've just had lots of friends who are girls in my life, I had some really close girlfriends like that you could talk about these such things and stuff like that. And so I just think they nailed it perfectly. And they're so supportive of him. I just love it. So and he's supportive of them. So yeah, I like them a lot. Okay, so you mentioned it. I don't know, maybe a hot take about the soundtrack not being your favorite. I will say, unlike maybe some of the other Cameron Crowe's movies where I really noticeably hear the songs. Obviously, In Your Eyes is the big one from this one. But unlike some like Jerry Maguire and Almost Famous, I mean, the songs are just like right there in your face. I think these are a little bit more in the background, but this isn't your favorite soundtrack ever.
No, and it's probably more just the selection of songs. I mean, I wasn't in high school when those were a thing. I'm sure if I were, there'd be some, nostalgia factor there for me as well. But that's okay. I don't have to love these. I don't hate them. They just, it honestly is, I'm going to go out and buy like either the CD or the vinyl version of this just so I can get those liner notes. I'll probably just Google them because I was so curious to read that he had actually said a lot about them. I mean, there's nothing I love more, honestly, in life than not liking something and then someone that I know appreciating it and explaining to me what it is that they love about it. And I'll instantly usually love it more than things that I love. You know what I mean? I kind of like being surprised in that way. And so, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But I probably wouldn't buy that soundtrack just to listen to those songs.
Okay. Yeah. So I listened to it, and also I'll just go through some of the artists that are on here. Peter Gabriel, Cheap Trick, Depeche Mode, Living Color, Cult of Personality, which is kind of a very popular song. Bob Dylan's on here, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Steely Dan. I don't know if you want to count the Whitney Houston song, Greatest Love of All, the graduating senior sings on stage. But I would say Cameron Crowe probably really has a knack. Like if you listen to his other soundtracks, he always uses very popular artists, but he probably has a tendency to pick some tracks that you've not ever heard of. It's very it's a very music person guy to be like, yeah, those are the hits, but have you heard this song? And so that's what I feel like this soundtrack is a lot of. It's like, oh yeah, have you heard of this band? But have you heard this song? Probably what they would say back in the day, the B-side. And that's kind of how I felt. So I gave this 4 hearts because in listening, I was like, oh yeah, I really enjoy the music. I was a little surprised because I didn't know a lot of the songs, but I really like the Steely Dan song on there for whatever reason. But yeah.
Well, I certainly like a lot of the artists that are on it. The songs that were selected, just not my favorite. However, I'm not going to rank this one as low as you think I might because it does have In Your Eyes on it. It is. I don't think you can think about this movie apart from that song. When I told you I had wanted to discuss this one, if we have just a couple minutes, there is a very strong tie to this song. And I mentioned that summer I was watching this a lot is when I was first talking to who was now my wife, and Nicole Nordeman. She's a Christian artist, contemporary Christian artist. I had her album and she had a cover of this on it. And I had listened to that so many times, not ever having realized I mean, I didn't think that she wrote it, but I had never associated, oh, wait, that's like a, classic Peter Gabriel song. And so then I was, watching this movie at the same time. It's just a nice special connection because it's a great song. So, and because I know that Cameron Crowe put this together with a great amount of intentionality, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5.
Okay. All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe not so much of a hot take.
Maybe not. Maybe not. I just don't like the songs.
So the fourth category, chase scene or declaration of love. So I think this one can kind of be a little hard. I think people would go to the boombox scene, but I don't know. I think more towards like the kind of end of the movie, and she certainly kind of comes back to him. And I think the declaration of love could also be tied into the seeing her dad, in prison in that courtyard. I think this one's a little hard to gauge, but what would you rank it?
It is hard to gauge because the moment where she kind of chases him, where she goes to the kickboxing gym.
Yes.
And first of all, they made her look like 10 years older in that scene, more than any scene around. Like her eyes were sunken in. And it was very strange to me, from like I don't even know what you'd call it, like makeup type of situation. But what was it he said to her, Nathan? He's like, do you love me, or do you just need somebody? Like, is it me that you need, or just somebody?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, and then what does he say? I don't even care what the answer is. Because that kind of alludes like his thing. Like, so I am going to say this is a hard one for the declaration of love scene. I want to make it just real, where we have to read a lot into it, would be the final scene with the pin with her dad.
Okay.
Because that, I mean, if you're not watching closely, that can feel like such a brush off. However, I don't think that it was. I really don't think it was, because when her dad first suggested she give Lloyd a pin, and it was probably close to a $9,000 pin. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that was probably an IRS, tax evasion pin.
Right.
But, she says, Dad, never in a million years could I give him a pin to show him that I care about him. But then, kind of not knowing what else to do, she does, because I think in that haste of them breaking up in the car, she does feel that about him, and she does want to show him. And I'm sure he was like, he didn't understand the meaning behind or intentionality behind it. And I feel like that was just such a nice tie-in at the end of the movie. You could read it a few different ways, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree. So how do you rank it after saying all that?
Okay. I'm sorry. This wasn't about explaining. It was ranking it. I would say I'll give that, because it is kind of like you really can chew on it. I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
Okay. That's what I gave it as well. I really liked that scene, and very, I mean, Cameron Crowe just knows how to bring closure to a story. Yeah. And, for very seemingly very complicated reasons, I think they do a good job of that. And the last category I have is rewatchability.
Yeah, I'll give this a 5 out of 5. It's easily rewatchable. Easily.
Yeah. I was there as well, especially watching this, and immediately I save probably maybe the car scene. I was like, this is a movie I think Hallie would really like. Like, I just, it was already kind of a movie. I was just like, oh, like, okay, I'm gonna lock that away as like when we don't know what else to watch. Like, hey, we need to watch this movie again. So yeah, very much so, and that's what I've always loved about Cameron Crowe. Always so many funny moments, but also very many dramatic moments as well. And it's no surprise, I meant to say earlier, but this is produced by James L. Brooks, who has always been one of my favorite creators, who created Terms of Endearment and broadcast news. And so he's known for these type of movies that bring a lot of drama, but also, the real life humor as well. So it's very fitting that this, if it wasn't Cameron Crowe, you might have maybe guessed it. Maybe this is a James L. Brooks film. So very much in that vein. Do you have any closing thoughts about this movie?
Just if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's worth one watch. I don't care when you grew up. There's some things that might make you uncomfortable, but you're gonna have some nice laughs. You're gonna walk away feeling pretty good about these two people. I have to mention this is a terrible way to end something, but at the party, there's a guy that comes up to Lloyd, and clearly has some self-doubt issues, and he's like, "So, Diane, how did you get a date with Diane?" I just asked her.
Mm-hmm.
This gives me hope. Thank you. This gives me hope. And I don't know if it's because he sees Lloyd as his equal, as just, or not. But that was a nice that guy got a lot of screen time in the movie.
He did.
I mean, he spent hours with this guy. So again, a terrible way to close out because I'm rehashing back to it, but moments like that. I mean, this movie almost feels like just a series of those types of moments. You could almost just talk about that. I actually bought this on Apple, like via Apple, right? And it's funny, one of the special features, like digital features, are scenes, and I thought it was like on a DVD where it's like taking you to, like, specific points in time in the movie, but it isn't. It's just about 15 scenes like that. And they all kind of hold up on their own. They're nice. So
recommendations.
Well, anything that you are like reading or listening to or watching that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Two things. One, as far as watching goes, if you haven't seen The English with Emily Blunt,
I've heard of it.
I think it's a mini series. It's one season of it, start to finish. It's not the type of thing you're going to want to watch while you're folding laundry. You're going to want to sit down with it, soak it up. Great visuals, amazing story. Definitely worth watching.
Okay, what streaming platform is that on?
Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay. We'll have to check that out. What's the second thing?
Second thing is music, and the artist is Madison Cunningham.
Okay.
Amazing.
I don't know anything.
Amazing. She's a young singer-songwriter. She is one of these people that once you start listening to her music, if you're the type of person that likes looking at liner notes, the people that she already has collaborated with. I mean, if you go look her up on iTunes, she probably has more collaboration songs than she does even albums of her own. But she is, I'm a guitarist, and she is a guitarist. She is good, but she's a singer-songwriter too. And so she's not flashy, but she's really good, and her songwriting is incredible. So if you haven't given her a listen, please do. Pin It Down is the song I would start with. If you're going to listen to one song by her, it's called Pin It Down. It's really good.
Okay. I'll have to check that out for sure. Just sticking to the music storyline of this whole podcast and your recommendation. Mine is actually a book, and I would actually recommend the audiobook version of this, but I think you would really like this a lot, Beau. But it's The Storyteller: Tales of Life and Music by Dave Grohl, who is famously the lead singer of the Foo Fighters, his band, but also the drummer of Nirvana. And I say the audiobook, I think a lot of it is really brought to life by him reading the story. And he's always have kind of said that he almost seems like a Muppet in real life human form, but I think you would really like this book. It's really not so much about the songs that they wrote it. You won't get like backstory to why I wrote this song and this is what this lyric meant, but it really is just these kind of little snippets of his life. And there's really, he goes from kind of start to finish, but there's really no, like, he just kind of talks about something. They don't have this really like overall connection. He kind of ties it all together at the end, but I think you'd really like that.
Ooh,
but it is funny too, though, if you listen to it, just because, he's so famous at this point and such a well-respected musician, but as part of the appeal of the book is hearing these like stories of other like famous musicians, but he tells us this one story where Joan Jett, stays the night at his house and plays with his girls, or he talks about how he's friends with Paul and Linda, and you're like, yeah, this person definitely lives in a whole different world than I live in. But how he got there is just really interesting, and I've always loved Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. Always been a big fan of him, so I'd suggest that book. As spring is winding down and we are heading towards Memorial Day weekend, I thought it'd be a good chance to maybe take a little breather from this rom-com list and talk about one of my favorite summer blockbusters, Jurassic Park. Believe it or not, Beau, it is celebrating its 30th anniversary.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be a good time to revisit that. I can't convince Hallie to watch this movie with me.
Why?
Well, dinosaurs. That's all she always says is dinosaurs.
Is that boring to her, or is it that it's maybe scary, or it's just of just no interest? It's just not in her.
Oh, no interest. I don't think the scariness factor, but I think she's she probably just still thinks in her head like being around boys. They just always talked about dinosaurs, so she doesn't know what the big deal is. But I keep trying to tell her it's really not about dinosaurs. I mean, it is, but so. Anyway, so listen to next week's episode to find out if I could convince her to watch it with me.
Wait.
Yeah. So, as always, check out moviesourlife.com for episode reviews and more. If you love this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. This really helps us with finding new listeners. And Beau, thanks for coming on and talking about this movie. It's always great to talk to you, but anyway, I'm really glad you picked this movie. I as soon as I was watching it, I was like, yeah, this movie is Beau. It just felt like it.
Oh yeah. Hey, thanks for asking me on. And if you want someone to talk about Jurassic Park 5, I'm your man whenever that comes around in about 10 years.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. Well, thanks again to everybody for listening, and remember to file your tax returns.